Imagine yourself slowly closing your eyes. The sound you hear now does not belong to this age, but to something that existed long before history. A world without writing, without kings, without cities, without names. Only the wind moves softly over the ground that has just dried after millions of years beneath the sea. The earth was grayish-green then, and the sky was not always blue. Clouds drifted slowly, never in haste, as if everything in that time had no need to hurry. There were no clocks, no numbers, no concept of time. Everything simply existed. Under a gentle sun, not yet fierce, the first signs of life began to look upon the world. They knew neither fear nor speech, only silence as still as morning water. If you listen quietly, you can still hear it now, the whisper of a forgotten age, like a song without melody that somehow soothes the soul, carrying something vast and inexplicable. In that young earth, the rain fell as a blessing. Each drop created a small circle where life would grow in secret. The first grasses appeared through the damp soil, and small creatures moved through mist that knew no direction. There was no noise of machines, no voices of humankind, only the harmony of silence. Among the morning fog, shadows of ancient trees swayed gently, their long branches like old hands in prayer. The scent of earth and water blended into an aroma that no longer exists in our world. Everything seemed newly born. Even the air you breathe now is part of that same breath, the long sigh of a world that once existed before civilization, before history learned how to write its own name. Night descended without color. The moon was not yet round. The stars still hid behind veils of cosmic dust. The ancient world slept in deep stillness, and within that darkness there was no fear, only peace. Sometimes, from afar, came the faint murmur of young rivers forming. The water was cold and clear, reflecting dim light from an unsettled sky. Along those shores, life began, vines creeping over stones, insects wandering without direction, and within them, a spark of awareness began to stir. Something like memory, or perhaps the earth's first dream. The world was dreaming of itself, not yet knowing what it would become, as if written by an unseen hand, calm and patient as, though even time bowed in reverence. Now imagine standing there, where history had not yet begun. There are no human sounds, no words, only your heartbeat adjusting to the rhythm of the earth. The air you breathe is pure, untouched by anything but the first signs of life. The earth was then a vast womb, warm and soft. It was not angry, not hurried, only breathing in a long, peaceful rhythm. Perhaps in that era, sleeping and waking were not two separate things. Everything flowed from dark to light, from stillness to silence, then back again. That was the beginning of everything, when the world did not yet know the difference between life and death, between time and eternity. And the night went on. The old earth shifted slightly, finding its balance. Mountains rose, seas receded, and new land appeared like a long-held breath. If you were quiet enough, you could hear the soft sound of the earth arranging itself, a sound beyond human hearing. In that place, there was no history to remember, no future to wait for, only the eternal now. A nameless moment, still and perfect in its unknowing. That was the world before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, before humankind learned to call itself by name. Night in the ancient world was not like the night we know now. There were no artificial lights piercing the darkness, no campfires flickering in the distance. Only a faint young moon and stars, too shy to shine. That primeval sky seemed to still be learning how to glow, like the eyes of a child seeing the world for the first time. Beneath that sky, the earth breathed slowly, releasing thin mist from valleys and swamps still wet with the remnants of ancient seas. The wind moved gently, carrying a faint scent of salt and soil, something between ocean and land. The world had no clear boundaries. Everything seemed like a painting still drying, its colors soft, uncertain, yet alive in ways beyond words. Imagine yourself standing in the middle of a vast plain with no name. There is no north, no map, no sound, except the whisper of wind and your own steps over tender ground. In the distance, you hear the faint rumble of the earth shifting beneath its crust. Sometimes it trembles, not in anger but in the effort of arranging itself. Mountains that would one day witness history were being born, lifting dust and stone into the air, then falling silent again as if nothing happened. If you looked up, you might see something no modern eyes have seen: the color of night, not as black, but as blue-gray, breathing softly between the newborn stars. The earth then knew no life as we do. No homes, no laughter, no footprints. But something alive lingered in the air, a sense of awakening, a long breath preparing the arrival of the future. Among the hanging mists of the valleys, ancient plants swayed gently. Their trunks were soft and thick, their leaves long like arms. Each time the wind passed, they trembled as though speaking with the soil. In deep marshes, water stirred as primitive fish surfaced. Their forms were imperfect, yet they were the beginning of life that would one day rule the land. In silence, the world wrote itself in symbols that no one could read, in gestures too subtle for eyes to see. If you looked closer, every stone had a story. Some were warm, newly born from the earth's molten heart. Others were cool and cracked, like the wrinkles of something ancient. Between the rocks, small bubbles escaped, carrying the faint scent of metal. Under the pale moonlight, they burst softly as if the earth whispered to itself. No one listened, no one recorded. Yet perhaps that was how true history began, not with words, but with the smallest of movements, with silence waiting to be understood. The night rolled on, mist thickening over lowlands. From the west, thunder murmured for the first time. The gentle, ancient sky tightened, clouds curling in silver-gray swirls. Rain began to fall slow, deliberate upon giant leaves and wet stones. It was not only water, but also an opening, a beginning. From those drops, the first rivers were born, carving their way through valleys. The water gleamed beneath distant lightning, flowing aimlessly, yet already forming patterns, the early design of time itself. And beyond all of that, something waited. Not in human form, not in divine form, but something softer awareness, realizing its own existence. Perhaps it was not a being, but the consciousness of the earth itself. It looked from within the stones, the waters, the mists, realizing that the world was too silent to remain empty. From that silence, life began. From that stillness, the first sound was born, perhaps just a sigh, but the beginning of all language. The world began to speak to itself. If you could hear it now, you might not understand its meaning. But there is peace in that whisper, the same tone we sometimes hear in the quiet of night when the modern world stops its noise. A sound that reminds us that before everything began, there was a time when silence was the only form of existence. A time when sleep and wakefulness were one and the same. When time held no meaning. And there, the journey began before kingdoms, before pyramids, before history chose to write itself upon stone. Around 4 billion years ago, the earth was not yet a home for anything. It was a sphere of stone and metal, floating in emptiness, spinning beneath an unstable young sun. Its sky was not blue, but red-gray, veiled in sulfur and carbon vapors. There was no true sky to see, only swirling clouds of heat and lightning striking the surface with unimaginable force. The oceans were not yet formed, only vast pools of boiling liquid, evaporating slowly and leaving behind crystals of salt and metal. If one could stand there, there would be no sound except the hiss of magma breaking through the thin crust or the distant growl of the planet shaping itself. The earth was young, yet old in its struggle, each moment a battle to remain whole amidst the chaos of the universe. At that time, life had no form. There were no leaves, no air to breathe, no soft ground underfoot. Yet, behind the darkness and heat, something was growing, something unseen but felt by the planet itself. Tiny particles met in acidic seas, forming trembling chains. They did not breathe, they did not think, but they held the possibility of life. Earth became a silent laboratory where a great experiment unfolded without witnesses. Lightning struck the waters, igniting sparks that made molecules dance. Some shattered instantly, others merged into new shapes, some lasting just a moment longer. And there, in that fragile persistence, life began not in gardens of beauty, but in boiling mud and poisoned air. If you could walk along that ancient shore, you would see the water not blue but metallic black, bubbling from the depths. Each burst released fumes of sulfur and iron. No birds, no calm skies, only the deep thunder beneath the crust. Yet amid destruction, there was rhythm, a slow-forming harmony. The earth's chaos had purpose. Was tuning itself like a primordial musician preparing for a vast symphony. Time then was not our time. A second could feel like millennia, and millennia could pass in a single breath. There was no day or night, only changing light from red to gold, from dim to bright. Amidst that chaos, atoms began to dance to a hidden rhythm. They met, collided, separated, and met again. Each collision offered a new chance, and from countless failures, one succeeded in lasting longer, one succeeded in replicating itself. From that moment, life in its simplest form was born. No one witnessed it. No eyes saw it. No voices named it. Yet, if Earth could speak, it might have whispered that it no longer felt alone. In the boiling seas, a spark of awareness appeared not as thought, but as persistence against oblivion. It was small, too small to see, but strong enough to resist destruction. It began to divide, to duplicate itself quietly, as if it knew this harsh world would someday become its home. Some perished, dissolved in hot waters or scorched by unfiltered sunlight. But some survived, hiding in crevices deep beneath the sea, where the heat was bearable but still alive. There they remained, adapting, waiting for the world to soften. Time passed unnoticed, thousands of years, then millions, each second becoming a tiny brick in the great structure of life. Meanwhile, the earth changed. Mountains rose and fell. Oceans spread and retreated. Oxygen began to fill the air through accidents of chemistry that became laws of nature. The red sky slowly turned blue. For the first time, the heavens resembled what we know: a calm, vast ceiling, a mirror for what life would soon become. Yet before beauty came, the world endured a silence beyond imagination. Thousands of years with no sound but its own breath. The sea sighed softly. The mountains exhaled through their vents. The clouds drifted aimlessly. Everything moved without witness, without story, without language. But in that silence, life learned patience. It learned to grow without hurry, to endure without purpose. It waited as if it already knew its moment would come. And when life finally arrived, the earth did not cheer. It simply trembled softly, like a mother watching her child open its eyes. No sound, no flash of light, only a quiet ripple in ancient waters, marking that something had changed forever. The once empty world now had an inhabitant, however small. History began without words, but from that moment on, the earth never slept again. Millions of years passed without witnesses, yet the earth kept writing its own story with the ink of time. After the first life appeared in the primordial sea, something began to move within the water. Tiny, nearly invisible shapes danced with the current. They had no eyes, no sound, only soft bodies made of liquid and protein, trembling when brushed by subtle waves. From these simple beings, the world began to change. The once empty oceans became a quiet garden where life learned to survive. They multiplied, competing for space, and faint light filtering through the smoky surface. There were no predators, no prey, only the eternal rhythm of birth, death, and rebirth. The world knew no color, but within the waves and gas, life had begun to give the earth its first heartbeat. Slowly, the oceans became the heart of all things. In their lightless depths, life found a way to exist without sunlight. Those tiny creatures fed on heat and gas, exhaling oxygen into the unknown. They created air without knowing that one day it would give breath to others. They were unaware that their small movements were the first prayers of existence to the future. Above, volcanoes erupted. The sky changed hue, and acid rain fell for millennia. But below, in the silent sea, life quietly grew. Then came a great change. Life found new ways to live, not merely reacting, but adapting. Some built thin walls to protect against heat, forming shells. Others learned to share energy, creating intricate yet balanced relationships. For the first time, colonies emerged. They lived together, protected each other, depended on one another. Thus began the first communities of life, long before humans knew the meaning of cooperation. Time continued, neither rushed nor paused. The once toxic sea calmed. Sulfur gases thinned, and the once burning sun began to offer steady warmth. Over uncounted ages, the first color appeared pale green from organisms that captured light. They floated on the water's surface, swaying to the rhythm of ancient winds. Each fragile strand changed the world a little, turning gas into air, light into food, and the earth into a home. Seen from afar, the planet would look like a gray-green sphere glowing softly under a young sun. Inside its oceans, life pulsed like an endless breath. There was no sound, no song, only the soft motion of something that wished to live. From the sea, the story of life began. On land, silence still ruled. No trees, no grass, only stone and dust swept by the wind. Yet droplets from the sea slipped into cracks in the rock, carrying life in their tiny forms. They could not yet survive outside the water, but they tried. Each attempt ended in failure. Each failure became a lesson for the next. There was no plan, no intent, only the patience of nature that never hurries. As time flowed, the sea nurtured more complex life. From single-celled beings came multicellular ones. They built stronger bodies, with different parts serving different roles. Some drifted, some clung to rocks. Some began to swim in gentle motion, like a dance. The underwater world grew crowded, though no one heard it. To dive into those depths then would be like entering a dream, surrounded by strange, glowing shapes in the dark. And though the deep was peaceful, the surface roared. Volcanoes erupted, continents split, oceans rose and fell with the heartbeat of the earth. But life no longer feared destruction. It learned to endure, clinging to rock, hiding in cracks, sleeping beneath the heat, then growing again. It learned that to live was not to rule but to endure amidst chaos. Perhaps at that moment, the earth truly lived. Not because its shape changed, but because it now held something that could die, and therefore something worth living for. Every tiny organism became part of a vast breath shared by all. They did not know time, but time knew them. Every small vibration in that ancient ocean became an echo through history, shaping the world we now know. The earth, once only molten stone, now had a pulse. A quiet heartbeat, nearly silent but strong enough to move the stars. When the seas grew old enough to calm themselves, when waves no longer raged and the wind began to whisper gently above the surface, life looked up for the first time. It did not yet understand the meaning of the blue expanse above, nor the concept of air or space. But something called it to rise, to leave the comfort of darkness and seek what had never been. In unmeasured time, life began to crawl onto land. It was soft and fragile, like a shadow reaching for the sun. It had no lungs, no legs, only a damp body writhing among warm stones and wet soil. Yet with each attempt, the earth recorded it. Each failure left behind a small, invisible mark, a signature of life's first touch on dry ground. The wind carried salt from the sea, sprinkling it into cracks in the rock. Rain brought minerals, and from their meeting, small colonies were born, creatures brave enough to leave the water. They did not last long. The sun's light burned them, and the dry air cracked their skin like droughted earth. But every death gave rise to a generation slightly stronger, slightly more patient. Nature never hurried. It wrote its history in silence. Within that stillness, something simple yet extraordinary happened. Creatures that once captured light underwater now began doing so on land. They spread across the stones, forming a thin layer of pale green that covered the ground. Slowly, that layer grew, shielding the earth from heat, retaining moisture, creating gentler air to breathe. From that thin layer, the first terrestrial ecosystem formed. There were no trees, no flowers, only ancient moss draped over black stones, writing a silent poem about eternal patience. The sun that once threatened now became life's ally. Its warmth drew vapor from the sea, forming clouds that dropped the first land rain. The water carried nutrients, filled rivers, created swamps where life could grow again. Slowly, tiny creatures began to move in the shallow pools. They were not fish nor land animals, but something between. Their bodies thickened, their skins learned to endure air, and their inner organs began to understand the concept of breath. They were transitional forms, the bridges between water and land, between an old world and a new one. Time passed without sound or witness, only with the rhythm of the earth's heartbeat. Over millions of years, the world changed face. Once barren land turned green. Moss and algae evolved into small plants. Roots dug deep, holding water and shaping air. The once dry earth began to mist each morning. The planet had found a new scent, the scent of life. To stand at the shore then would be to see a silent wonder. Thin mist hugged giant rocks. The ground shimmered with green carpets glistening under the young sun. Between them, streams carried fragments of life to higher places. There were no birds, no insects, only wind brushing stone and the distant murmur of waves. Yet from that stillness, the world was growing, preparing its stage for something greater. Beneath the surface, chemistry continued. Elements met and merged, forming complex molecule seeds of future life. Each layer of the earth stored memories of evolution, like pages written slowly by time. Nothing rushed. Nothing sought perfection, only continuation. Meanwhile, in the deep sea, life evolved further. Swimmers developed stronger fins that lifted them briefly to the surface. Some began to gaze toward the light, searching for something above. They did not know what they sought, but they knew the world did not end beneath the waves. Slowly, some followed that instinct, leaving the sea and trying to survive on land. They lay upon the mud, breathing air with fear and awe. Their bodies trembled, their organs unready, but the first step was taken. Nature did not celebrate, only observed. From that step, history would unfold. They would evolve, becoming the first land animals, opening the path for those that would one day walk, run, and think. But for now, the earth was still quiet. Its skies were red, its seas steaming, and new life hid within the morning fog. There was no awareness, no fear, only the simple desire to exist. And from that desire, the world began to breathe with a new rhythm. If one could hear it, Perhaps the earth then sounded like a long, calm breaths, soft, repeating, and patient. The sound of life learning to become itself. The sea was no longer just a birthplace, but a stage for diversity, unlike anything before. After billions of years of darkness and trial, life within it began to take form, like a symphony emerging from silence. Tiny bodies, once nothing more than shadows, grew defined. Some resembled petals, others threads of drifting silk, and some began to move with faint intention. In the depths of that ancient ocean, color began to bloom. Blue merged with green light, and among the gentle waves, life danced in slow motion, almost meditative. Nothing hurried, nothing fought. Everything existed in balance, earth, breathing in its long sleep. Sunlight filtered through the surface, casting gentle dances among the water's particles. Each ray became a line of time connecting past and future. The tiny beings swam within it, unaware they were writing the beginning of life's endless chain. From microscopic creatures emerged a new system. Those who consumed light, those who consumed the living, and those who waited below for what drifted down. The first food chain was born not from hunger or desire, but from balance. There was no ambition, no greed, only natural order, emotionless yet beautiful in its quiet rhythm. Time moved like a slow current. Thousands of new forms appeared, some endured, others vanished without trace. The seas grew crowded with color and motion. The first shelled animals emerged, their bodies hard and gleaming like jewels. They glided along the seafloor, leaving faint trails in soft sand. Above them, larger creatures appeared, finned like wings, bodies scaled and translucent. They moved gracefully, as though water itself extended their flesh. There was no sound, only endless motion, without beginning or end. Some adapted to darkness. In the deep, lightless seas, they created their own glow. From small bodies came bioluminescence, the first natural light, drifting through the water like fallen stars. Imagine a world where ocean nights were not black, but filled with gentle, pulsating lights, second sky beneath the waves. The light served no purpose, sought no witness, but simply was a calm breath of the living planet. Earth kept turning, and the oceans filled with life. Tiny organisms built vast colonies, forming the first corals. From afar, they looked like underwater cities, though no mind could see their beauty. They grew by repetition, shaped by currents, following a symmetry born of chaos. From those mindless cities, the world learned order, pattern, beauty without an observer. Creatures within grew more complex. Some developed eyes not to see as humans would, but to sense light's change. The first eyes were nothing more than awareness between day and night. Yet from that moment, a new history began. The world learned to tell light from dark, motion from stillness, life from death. It was the dawn of perception without thought, without mind, yet a beginning. In some corners, life connected. One being clung to another, forming the first symbiosis. Some became protectors, some parasites. Some lived together for no reason at all. Nature created relationships before the concept existed. Thus arose the first complex ecosystems, where life depended on life without knowing why, only because that was the law of existence. At times, the earth trembled beneath. Submarine volcanoes erupted, releasing deadly heat. Thousands perished instantly. Yet in the ash and molten rock, new life appeared, creatures living without light, without oxygen, drawing energy from the planet's heart. They were proof that life never dies, only changes. The sea, in silence, watched each birth and each end. If one could dive into that ancient ocean, one would see a tranquil, breathtaking sight. Silver creatures drifting in slow schools, shells scattered like gems, bubbles rising like unspoken prayers. There was no sound but the gentle shifting of water, no meaning but existence itself. The world was still quiet, but no longer empty. Life had found rhythm, and the earth began its first song, a song without words or melody, yet felt by every particle that was. For life then, time had no meaning, no future, no past, only continuation. The ocean was a womb, and every drop a growing story. If the earth could speak, it might say that everything alive was part of its memory, that every swimming creature and trembling algae were letters in a long poem about endurance. So the sea remained calm, nurturing all within, waiting for them to one day learn to leave. In that silence, life continued to grow endlessly, wordlessly, like an eternal breath. The world was still young, yet it had already begun to dream. The land, barren and silent for billions of years, began to change. From the rich oceans, tiny living specks drifted toward the shore, clinging to wet stones touched by the tides. There, a new chapter began. No one witnessed it, no eyes understood its meaning, yet from that moment, something in silence began to stir. The biological clock of the world turned in a new direction. Earth was about to learn the color green. At first, green did not mean forests, but a soft layer of algae and moss covering rocks and moist soil. They had no flowers, no roots, only thin threads drinking water from air and dew. Yet beneath that simplicity, they were the first conquerors of land. They turned the planet's gray surface into living green. From that hue, contrast was born. Landscapes gained meaning. The wind began to carry a new scent, the damp fragrance of life rooted in earth. Under the rising sun, the air changed. The small plants breathed carbon and exhaled oxygen, creating a new balance between sea and sky. Through every trembling leaf, earth learned to breathe slower and deeper, thickening the once toxic air. Clouds grew frequent, rains gentler, and the water cycle found rhythm. It was as if the planet had begun to talk to itself in patterns of calm repetition. Meanwhile, the first sea creatures tested the limits. Some crawled onto land, bodies slick and fragile, wriggling on wet sand before retreating to the waves. They were not amphibians as we know them, but transitional forms, soft bodies seeking air, yet bound to water. Many dried beneath the sun, but others endured a little longer, strengthening skin, finding new ways to breathe. Evolution had no purpose, only possibility. Over time, plants grew bolder. Their stems thickened, roots dug deeper, leaves spread wide to catch the sun. The once barren soil now pulsed with deep green. The first rains after that soaked everything, streaming between roots and moss, forming glassy rivers. The world began to mirror its own sky. The land became the reflection of the life upon it. Among the ancient leaves, the first insects appeared small, light, with wings like thin shadows. They flew low, touching wet leaves as if testing reality itself. They did not know why they flew, but the oxygen-rich air let them rise. For the first time, the earth hummed. The hum was not music, but the rhythm of life awakening. The sky then glowed orange more often than blue. Thick clouds hung low, and lightning flashed silently. Yet for those first beings, it was a perfect world. No predators, no threat but time and weather. They lived in harmony so pure it felt like agreement among all living things. The world was not to be owned, only inhabited. Rain fell in regular patterns, flooding young valleys and forming shallow lakes where new life waited to begin. Perhaps, if someone could stand at the edge of that primeval forest, they would see something strange, yet soothing. Mist floated between tall, primitive plants like giant ferns. The ground was soft with moss, leaves dripping water. In the distance, insects shimmered in dim light like fallen stars. No birds, no mammals on, limes and whispers of rain. The world felt young, innocent, and full of promise. In that balance, time continued. Plants spread wider, forests grew denser, casting the first shadows beneath green canopies. Earth's temperature fell gently. The air cooled, rain thickened. None of it was conscious, but the result was a world more hospitable than ever before. When the sun sank behind smoking mountains, the world looked like a moving painting. The sea gleamed gold, and at its edge, new life crawled quietly, leaving damp trails on sand soon to dry. No one knew that from that step, the future of all land life would begin. The world remained silent, but silence full of meaning as if the earth was preparing for its next dream. The planet had changed, and its quiet now carried the sound of life. The world was no longer ruled by the sea. The land had become a vast green ocean, a living forest stretching without end. Valleys were filled with dense primeval trees, mountains cloaked in vines and mist. Sunlight pierced the leaves in golden threads, dancing in air thick with oxygen. Earth was breathing too deeply now. Every breath in the atmosphere overflowed with life. Plants had evolved into towering giants, lepidodendron, sigillaria, calamites, tree-like forms with scaled trunks and feather-like leaves. Their roots dug deep into wet soil, forming endless swamps. Rain fell daily, dripping from leaf to leaf, creating shallow pools where enormous insects crawled. These insects were monstrous by our standards. Dragonflies the size of hawks hovered in the thick air, wings glinting in sunlight. Centipedes 2 meters long slithered among roots. Beetles clacked their shells like drums. No birds, no mammals, only hums, clicks, and the whisper of enormous wings. Standing in that world would feel like standing inside a living breath. The smell of wet earth and resin filled every lungful. The air was heavy and damp. the sunlight soft and fractured. Beneath the canopy, water ran gently among roots, forever whispering. Everything moved, everything lived. But beauty came with imbalance. The oxygen-rich air fed massive fires. A single lightning strike could ignite forests that burned for days. Smoke turned the sky black, sunlight dimmed. Yet life returned stronger, greener. The planet did not mourn. It only began again. Among those shadows, the first true land animals appeared small, lizard-like creatures creeping through mud and roots. Their lungs were still weak, their skins still wet, but they hunted insects and laid eggs on land. The food chain had come ashore. The sky was rarely clear. Warm rains, thick fog, and low clouds made the world feel like endless dusk. Yet it was paradise for those who lived within it. No winters, no hunger, only cycles of growth and decay. The planet breathed slowly, peacefully. And in that peace, sound was sacred. The hum of insects, the drip of rain, the groan of trees bending in wind formed a rhythm both eternal and calm. If one could listen now, they might hear not chaos, but meditation. Sometimes a deep cracking echoed an ancient tree falling into a swamp, swallowed by mud. Thousands of years later, it would become coal fossilized sunlight from a forgotten age. One day, creatures called humans would burn it, never realizing they were consuming the breath of this ancient world. There was something holy about it all. Nature seemed to be waiting, dreaming of what would come next. Every drop of rain, every leaf that fell, every seed buried beneath the soil contributed to a destiny unseen. The earth was preparing for consciousness. The forests glowed faintly. Bioluminescent fungi and insects shimmered, lighting the fog in blue and green hues. The air was alive with quiet light. The world was half dream, half reality. Beneath it all, the earth slept and dreamed of the beings who would one day look up at the stars and ask, where did it all begin? And deep below, hidden in the moist soil, small eggs waited. They belonged to creatures neither fish nor amphibians, something new, something ready to walk the dry land. The earth was about to take another step in its long, patient dream, the awakening of the true dwellers of the land. The sun began to shine stronger, burning away the fog that had blanketed the primeval forests for millions of years. Change came not in an explosion, but in a long, slow breath, the earth exhaling and inhaling in a new rhythm. Swamps dried, rivers shrank, and the land cracked beneath the orange sky. From the drying mud, new creatures emerged bolder, heavier, and built to walk. They were the pioneers of the true terrestrial world. Among the roots, large reptilian shapes moved. Their thick skin glistened, their steps heavy but sure. No longer bound to the water, though still carrying its memory within their blood. They were neither fish nor amphibian, something in between. The world had not yet given them names, but they represented transformation itself. The air grew hotter. Oxygen levels fell. Giant trees collapsed, replaced by smaller, tougher plants. The earth adapted, and everything that lived upon it faced a choice to change or to vanish. In every extinction, life found room to begin again. Massive amphibians wandered across the land, seeking water, yet learning to survive without it. Their limbs grew stronger, their lungs more capable. They hunted the remaining giant insects and sometimes each other. The forest was now a quiet stage of predator and prey. Balanced without cruelty, without fear, just the endless act of living. At night, the world's voice changed. The heavy hum of giant insects faded, replaced by deep growls and slow, deliberate movements among the shadows. The air smelled of dry soil. The sky cleared more often now, revealing stars that had always been there, but unseen. The same stars that one day humans would name and worship. Sometimes, a great shape moved along the swamp's edge. Its skin shimmered, its reflection rippled in the dark water. It drank, then lumbered away, leaving wide footprints that would one day harden into fossils. But tonight, there were no names, no science-only existence. There were no words in this world, yet there was a strange emotion in its silence. A feeling of patience, of something waiting to be born. The earth, after storms and fires, exhaled again, preparing. These early creatures did not know they were opening the road to the age of minds. They only lived, hunted, and slept. But their steps would echo through time. From their bones, something thinking would rise. Every breath they took beneath that ancient sun was part of a journey toward consciousness. As this age waned, rains grew scarce. Rivers thinned, swamps dried into valleys. Life sank underground, waiting. Eggs slept in the mud for years, holding a promise of the next dawn. The earth held its breath, preparing for something vast and fierce. And from the silence came a soft, slow whisper, the first breath of the age of giants. The world was ready for the reign of the true titans. The ancient sun now shone more fiercely, piercing the thin clouds above the wet valleys. Millions of years had passed since life first left the water, and the earth had changed completely. Swamps hardened into plains. Forests rose like cathedrals, and the air grew heavy with heat and dust. It was the dawn of a new age, the age of great reptiles. Humanity would one day call it the reign of giants, the beginning of the dinosaurs. Towering trees stretched to the sky, their trunks thick and their leaves wide as shields. In the misty air, a new kind of life thrived. The insects that once ruled the skies were smaller now, replaced by great reptiles that lumbered through the jungle. One of them, a massive herbivore, slowly through the trees. Its long neck swayed gently as it stripped branches clean. It was a creature of peace, not by choice, but by nature. Its size alone made it sovereign. Far below, a smaller creature watched from the shadows, a lizard-like being, quick and clever. It studied the world, learning through stillness and patience. Without knowing it, it carried the seed of intelligence. Evolution whispered quietly in its blood, unseen but inevitable. Evening painted the sky in violet and gold. The air shimmered with heat, the forests whispered softly. Night descended, and under the pale moon, the land seemed endless and eternal. Stars burned silently above the same stars that would one day guide human travelers and priests, but for now were only lights with no meaning. The earth trembled at times. Volcanoes spat ash into the sky, yet life endured. From every destruction came renewal. Death was not an end, but a rhythm. The world breathed, rebuilt, and continued without thought or sorrow. Under that vast sky, a small creature looked up at the moon. It did not know beauty or meaning, but something within it stirred a faint curiosity. The first spark of awareness, fragile yet unstoppable. The world was waiting, silently, for the awakening that would come eons later. The ancient sky shimmered with a silvery blue, vast and endless. Below it, the earth roared with life. Forests stretched beyond sight, valleys shimmered with mist, and great creatures walked the land in calm majesty. This was the height of Earth's glory, the reign of the dinosaurs. For millions of years, balance ruled everything. The giants of the land, sea, and sky moved in rhythm with the heartbeat of the planet. A massive predator walked along a riverbank, its muscles rippling under thick skin. It hunted by instinct, not thought. Every footprint it left would one day become a fossil, a silent message to the distant future. Nearby, herds of herbivores crossed the plains, their march like thunder over stone. They did not dream, did not remember, only lived in the eternal present. Above them, winged reptiles glided effortlessly through the clouds. They ruled the skies with elegance and strength, casting shadows over forests below. Far beneath the waves, giant marine reptiles hunted in ancient seas, their songs echoing through the depths. The earth was a perfect symphony, every breath in harmony. Yet balance is fragile. Deep within the planet, something stirred. Volcanoes grew restless, storms grew stronger, and seasons shifted. The air thickened, and the nights shortened. Change was coming, unseen and unstoppable. But life went on, unaware of the slow whisper of fate beneath its feet. As night fell, the earth rested beneath a sea of stars. In the stillness of the forest, a young creature looked up at the sky, unaware of the stone drifting through space, a messenger of extinction, still millions of years away. The world was peaceful, suspended in its moment of perfection, unaware that perfection never lasts. There came a time when the earth grew too quiet, as if holding its breath. The forests were still green. The rivers still flowed, but something subtle began to change. The air thickened, the light dimmed, and cracks appeared in once fertile ground. Volcanoes awoke, veiling the sun behind gray smoke. Ash fell like soft snow, and daylight turned to endless dusk. The world began to tire, though life continued unaware of its slow unraveling. Thunder rolled across darkened skies. Rain came, heavy and bitter, washing the forests bare. On the plains, starving herds wandered endlessly, leaving bones behind in the dust. Predators fought for what little remained, but hunger had become the law of nature. The seas, too, began to shift currents, twisted. The waters cooled, and the song of life beneath the waves faded into silence. Death came not as violence, but as weariness. Still, small signs of life clung to existence. Tiny plants pushed through cracks in the ash, and creatures hid in caves, enduring the cold. The earth did not die, changed. Beneath the ruins of the Great Age, new seeds waited. But when the northern mountains finally erupted, the world fell into a night without end. Ash buried everything, and the sun vanished for what felt like forever. Only when the darkness finally lifted did the world reveal its new face. The giants were gone, replaced by fragile survivors. From the quiet, life began again, smaller, humbler, but ready to dream once more beneath a different sky. When the last ash finally fell, the earth seemed to awaken from a long sleep. The gray sky softened, and a hesitant light returned. The world was silent, covered in ash and memory, yet beneath the stillness, something was stirring. The first rains came clear and pure, and from cracks in the hardened soil, green shoots began to rise. Fragile but determined, they reached toward the weak sun. Life, in its quiet defiance, had returned. Over ages, color returned to the land. Moss-covered stone, rivers carved new paths, and the air grew warmer. Tiny creatures crawled, swam, and flew once more, each movement a whisper of renewal. Mountains healed under soft carpets of green, and the ocean began to shimmer with new life. The earth had buried its old wounds beneath beauty. Beneath every leaf and ripple, traces of the ancient world slept silently, fossilized in time. And so began the slow rebirth of the planet. No fanfare, no miracles, only patience. Small things became many, many became complex, and from the smallest spark, evolution began its endless rhythm. The nights were quiet, the moon large, the stars sharp. In the hush of that newborn world, life dreamed once more. It did not remember what came before, simply continued, because that is what life always does. Even after the longest night, it begins again. Millions of years after the first silence, the earth was no longer still. The oceans shimmered beneath a young sun, and beneath the waves, life thrived. Tiny translucent beings swirled through the water, fragile, aimless, yet unstoppable. The sea became the first cradle of creation, for all single cells to colonies, from drifting forms to creatures with motion and instinct. Life was sculpting itself from nothing but chance and time. Slowly, color returned to the planet. Green moss crept over black stone, and strange soft plants swayed in shallow tides. Creatures with shells crawled in the sand, and long blind forms drifted through the current. Above, the land was empty, waiting, but the sea was alive with promise. Every drop of water held a story, every ripple a possibility. Nature did not rush. It whispered, learned, and adapted. Through countless generations, the impossible became real. Creatures learned to breathe air, to move across wet earth, to see light and shadow. The first explorers of the land dragged their soft bodies from the waves, unaware they were changing the world forever. Beneath a golden sky, in the hum of ancient tides, life had begun its long migration from ocean to earth, from silence to sound, from stillness to song. The once silent land began to breathe. From the edges of the sea, life slowly crept outward. Moss thickened over rocks, soaking up morning dew and spreading across the earth. For the first time, the land wore green. Ancient ferns rose, Mushrooms as tall as humans stood beneath a dim sun, and the air was heavy with the scent of wet soil. It was a quiet world, but alive in its stillness. The soft pulse of creation had reached the shore. From the swamps, creatures that once lived in the water began to crawl onto land. Their bodies were heavy, their skin wet and rough, yet they persisted. Each moment they survived a little longer out of water. The story of evolution moved forward. Forests grew denser, the sky brightened, and oxygen filled the air. Thunderstorms raged, lightning set the moss ablaze, and the ashes nourished new life. The planet was learning the rhythm of death and rebirth. In time, the land became a kingdom of green forests of towering ferns, insects with shining wings, and tiny creatures learning to breathe air. There were no eyes to see their struggle, no language to describe it, yet the earth remembered. Every footprint that dried into stone, every breath that filled the air with life, all whispered the same truth. That existence, fragile and small, had finally found the courage to leave the sea. Millions of years passed, and the once silent land became an endless garden. Vast forests blanketed the earth, stretching from valleys to mountains, from swamps to the ocean's edge. The air was rich and wet, filled with the scent of resin and soil. The sky turned blue, sunlight filtering through ancient trees, painting slow-moving shadows. Insects hummed, branches creaked, and rivers murmured softly. The land was no longer silent. It had learned to sing. Among the trees, life grew bolder. Amphibians adapted to land, digging shelters and waiting out the heat. At night, under a pale moon, only quiet songs of unseen creatures filled the air. Gigantic insects hovered in the mist, wings wide as birds, their movements slow and timeless. Everything depended on everything else. The fallen leaves fed the soil fed the roots, and life continued in a circle of silent exchange. From the swamps came the first reptiles, with scales to survive the dry air. They laid eggs on land, leaving the water behind. This was the beginning of something vast, the rehearsal for a new kind of dominion. The earth trembled with storms, lightning fed the soil, and forests reached ever higher. The air grew richer, the world more alive. In that green silence, the planet was preparing for its next chapter, the rise of creatures who would one day look at the stars and wonder where they came from. But for now, the earth only breathed, calm and patient, wrapped in the gentle heartbeat of its endless forest. From the damp swamps came the first giants of the land. Their heavy bodies moved slowly, leaving deep footprints in the mud that would one day turn to stone. The air trembled with their steps. They were neither hunters nor rulers, only wanderers in a silent paradise, covered in scales that gleamed under the sun. They breathed the world's early air, thick, wet, and full of life. The forests trembled when they passed, but there was no fear. The earth itself seemed to accept their weight. Smaller creatures lived beneath their shadows, feeding on leaves, hiding among roots, learning to survive. This was the first balance, the world's quiet rehearsal for the rhythm of life and death. At night, under pale moons, the giants stopped and simply breathed. Mist rose from their nostrils, glowing softly in the light. The air carried the scent of wet soil, and the trees swayed as if whispering. Time flowed like water. The old forests died, new ones grew, and the bones of the great beasts sank beneath the earth. They did not know they were building history. And so the planet kept moving, quietly, endlessly, shaping itself for what was to come, for creatures that would look to the sky and ask where it all began. The earth continued to move with a slow but steady rhythm. The land divided, the oceans widened, and the air grew warmer. Forests rose like green cathedrals, filled with moisture and mist. Beneath them, new life stirred insects with shimmering wings, long reptiles that basked in sunlight filtering through the trees. The world was changing, and from that change came giants. From warm sands hatched creatures of immense strength, with bones like pillars and skin like ancient stone. They ruled the land not with thought or will, but with presence. Their steps shook the ground. Their breath fogged the morning air. They were the first monarchs of the living earth, though they knew nothing of power or dominion. They were simply alive, in perfect harmony with a world that still remembered its beginning. Some grew tall enough to eat from treetops. Others darted through the shadows. In the water, predators watched with ancient patience. The sky, meanwhile, began to call. Small winged creatures learned to glide, to leap, to fall, and to rise again. The first flyers were born, and with them came the idea of freedom, the silent ambition of life to touch the sky. At night, under the bright ancient moon, the world felt eternal. The air shimmered with mist and sound. Yet beneath that peace, the earth shifted. Mountains breathed, stars moved, and far beyond, something unseen began to drift closer. The giants did not know. They simply lived. And time, patient as ever, kept writing, preparing for a dawn that would someday erase them. There was a time when the world seemed to stop growing, not because it was tired, but because it had found perfect balance. Forests covered nearly every land, and life flourished in gentle harmony. Giant herbivores roamed the valleys, slow and peaceful, feeding from towering trees. Carnivores watched them in silence, patient, guided not by cruelty, but by instinct. Every creature moved with purpose, and none with haste. The earth had become a great breathing organism, steady, calm, and alive. The skies were full of wings. Ancient birds glided over the canopy, tracing invisible paths above the mist. The seas shimmered beneath them, filled with creatures that had never seen land. Coral grew, reefs spread, and the first hints of color began to appear in nature. It was as though the planet had begun to paint itself, aware that beauty must exist before it fades. Yet beneath this stillness, the earth continued to shift. Volcanoes exhaled, rivers changed course, and continents slowly drifted apart. Life adapted, quietly and without fear. Some species vanished, others took their place. The balance remained, delicate but enduring. No one, no creature, no wind, no sound could sense what was coming. High above, something bright and ancient moved across the void. The world did not look up. It simply breathed, lived, and continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that the song was nearing its end. The days that once felt soft, began to change without warning. The air carried a strange warmth, the sun burned brighter, and the winds moved in erratic patterns. In the forests, plants began to dry even while rain still fell. Animals looked to the sky, sensing something beyond their understanding. The world was still beautiful, but a quiet unease began to hum beneath the surface, a note of warning that only the earth could hear. Mountains exhaled smoke for the first time in millennia. The ground trembled softly, as if stretching in discomfort. Volcanoes awoke, their breath spreading ash into the upper sky, dimming the sun. The oceans changed their rhythm. Currents reversed, temperatures shifted, and countless species drifted away from their ancient homes. The nights grew longer. Stars dimmed behind a veil of dust, and the horizon glowed faintly red. The world fell silent, wrapped in a strange calm that felt neither life nor death. Deep below, the planet stirred, pressing and folding, reshaping itself for reasons no creature could understand. And far beyond the sky, a light appeared, faint at first, then brighter each passing night. It did not blink. It did not belong. The earth did not resist. It simply waited, still and patient, for the moment it would once again become something new. At first, it was just a strange star, unmoving, unblinking. But each night, it grew larger. The sky shimmered with a pale green glow, and the air grew heavy, as if filled with unseen weight. Animals fell silent. Even the wind stopped moving. The earth, in its vast stillness, seemed to be holding its breath. Then came the silver rain, not water, but shining dust, falling softly like light turned to powder. The rivers glowed faintly under the dim sky, and mountains trembled in the distance. The oceans howled, and the volcanoes woke as if answering a call. Fire met ash, and the world became a twilight of red and blue. The object descended, burning, dragging a tail of light behind it. It was not a star, nor a moon, but something far older, a messenger of endings. Its glow washed over the earth, cold and brilliant, erasing shadow and warmth alike. And then, silence. The longest night began. The sun disappeared, and the world froze under a ghostly light. Rivers turned to glass, forests turned to ash, and even the air itself seemed to pause. When at last the object touched the edge of the atmosphere, the sky ignited. Light filled every valley, every ocean trench. It was not destruction, it was transformation. The earth closed its eyes and began to dream again. When the object finally reached the earth, there was no sound, no explosion. Only a deep trembling, as if the planet was taking its last slow breath. The ground shuddered. The mountains cracked. The seas boiled and rose. When the impact came, it was not fire that filled the world, but heat, spreading like breath through the air. Dust rose and covered the sky until no sun could be seen. Darkness came, vast and absolute. The world entered a timeless night. Ash fell for weeks, covering every valley and ocean. Life faded into silence. Yet beneath the ground, tiny things continued to move, quiet, stubborn, invisible. The planet was not dead. It was dreaming of renewal. The years passed. The dust thinned. The first light returned, pale and distant, revealing a gray, frozen world. But in the frozen lakes and under the stones, something pulsed. Small, living shapes, fragile but alive. They did not remember the past. They simply endured. The impact was not the end. It was the beginning of rewriting. The earth forgot what came before, but it carried memory in its bones. It was not a grave. It was a seed. And under that endless silence, the seed began to wait for warmth again. Thousands of years after the Great Silence, the earth began to breathe again. The black clouds thinned, and the sun returned, pale but steady. Rain fell softly for the first time in ages, touching the stone and soil with quiet care. Lakes formed in the cracks of the old world, and within them, small life began to move, silent, directionless, but alive. The air was still heavy, but it changed with time. The first color appeared faint green, perhaps the whisper of a plant or a memory of it. The mountains were covered in mist, rivers carved new paths, and the sea gathered all that was lost. Lightning split the horizon, creating sparks in the water. And from those sparks came something new, forms that grew and divided, repeating endlessly, without meaning but with purpose. No one witnessed it. The world created itself in silence. Slowly, the days grew brighter. Warmth returned, and in that warmth, life multiplied. The earth was no longer dead or asleep. It was awake, young, unsure, but alive. There was no beginning and no end. Only the quiet rhythm of creation, patient and endless. In the vast, dark oceans of the early earth, life grew in ways that defied understanding. Shapes were uncertain, directions meaningless. The sea became a quiet laboratory of nature, performing endless experiments without awareness or purpose. Small beings emerged, threads of life that waved in the current, or small spheres that pulsed like hearts learning to beat. They met, merged, and separated again, teaching the world the meaning of endurance and continuation. In the deep, where sunlight never reached, creatures began to create their own light, faint blue glows like drowned stars. Around volcanic vents, life thrived without air or sun, feeding on the heat of the young planet. Strange forms appeared, long tubes, ribbons that twisted, shapes that no one would ever see. There was no plan, only time and chance, moving together in endless patience. Each small failure was forgotten, each survival remembered by the world itself. If someone could look beneath those waters, they would see nothing, yet everything was happening. The quiet pulse of the ocean was the first heartbeat of a living world. Perhaps, somewhere in that darkness, one fragile creature carried within it the secret that would become all life to come. And the earth, still young and dreaming, began to realize it was no longer alone. There came a time when the ocean became not only a cradle of life, but the birthplace of awareness. Not human awareness, but the faint, instinctive kind that simply responded to the world. Tiny beings began to feel differences. They tensed at heat, drifted from cold, absorbed what the current brought. They did not know why, but they did it. This was the beginning of sensitivity, the first trace of knowing the world beyond oneself. And with it, the first memory appeared. The ability to remember what worked, to pass it on, molecule by molecule, generation after generation. They formed colonies, networks, systems without leaders or intent, only cooperation born from the need to survive. From that, the world learned the first meaning of connection. Some began to sense light, moving toward it, knowing warmth without seeing. Others lived on heat from the deep, thriving where no light reached. Death became nourishment. Decay became renewal. It was the first balance, the first quiet rhythm of life. A language without words, a harmony without sound. And perhaps, as the ocean dreamed beneath its endless surface, the earth smiled for the first time, realizing that within its depths, life had begun to recognize itself. There were days when the ocean seemed ordinary, yet within it, something was unfolding that would change the destiny of the entire earth. Among countless tiny bubbles and drifting particles appeared a new kind of life. Not a predator, not a hunter, but a quiet being that fed on light. It absorbed sunlight and turned it into energy. No grand intention, no awareness, only chemistry. Yet through this process, it began to rewrite the air itself. Every breath of these small beings released something new: oxygen. At first, only a whisper in the deep sea. Then, a rising tide of invisible breath, bubbling upward until it reached the surface and touched the sky. The heavens slowly changed color. The air purified itself, and without knowing it, the ocean had given birth to the first breath of the world. They worked in silence for ages beyond imagination. The earth began to breathe, and what had once been poison became life. The oceans turned green, filled with colonies of light eaters, covering rocks and ancient coral in soft emerald mats. They ruled gently, without force, without intention, reshaping the planet with patience. But their work brought an end to an older world. The ancient beings of the sulfur seas perished, unable to live in this new, oxygen-rich ocean. Their extinction was silent, their disappearance unnoticed. From their death, a new balance emerged, brighter, harsher, cleaner. And the earth continued to change. The sky turned blue, the seas shimmered, and the quiet ones of the deep kept working. They did not know that their endless devotion to light would one day make eyes possible to see it, lungs to breathe it, and hearts to remember it. The new sky arrived slowly, like a curtain lifting from a stage long closed. For the first time, light pierced the clouds and revealed the true blue of the heavens. The air, once thick with poison, was now laced with oxygen that scattered sunlight. The sea shimmered, and the land, newly born from the ocean's floor, gleamed under a soft, gentle light. It was the earth's first true morning. Great storms followed. Water vapor rose and gathered, forming immense clouds that poured rain over the raw, jagged lands. Lightning danced across the sky, its flashes igniting reactions in the atmosphere, fusing and breaking elements, creating new compounds, perhaps even new beginnings. The first rivers were born in that endless rain. They carved through the young stone, carrying minerals to the oceans, building chemistry, harmony, and balance. Each droplet carried the history of a forming world. The land was harsh, barren, and red. No trees, no grass, no sound but the wind. Yet beneath that stillness, the earth was preparing. Water-filled cracks pooled into lakes, soaked minerals into soil, and the foundations of life began to take root. In the sea, the small light eaters spread toward the shallows, clinging to sunlit rocks, glimmering like jewels. Waves carried them to the shores, and in that rhythm of tides, the first bridge between water and land began. It took millions of years, storms, and countless tides. But slowly, the sky grew bluer, the air cleaner, and the planets steadier. By night, the stars shone upon a damp and dreaming world, one that could finally breathe. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was a pause before the next creation, the still breath between waves of becoming. The world was learning to live. In the calm depths of the sea, more complex forms of life began to appear. They were no longer just single drifting cells, but soft-bodied beings that connected, shared, and slowly learned to exist together. Instinct, not thought, guided them, yet from that instinct, something vast began to grow. The seafloor became sacred ground. Filaments spread like living threads, attaching to rocks and sand, forming colonies that shimmered with pale color. They moved gently with the currents, gathering sunlight, transforming it into energy, and sharing it freely. Thus began Earth's first quiet act of cooperation. There were no leaders, no wars, only balance. Each creature played its part in silence, bound by the simple need to exist. Waves carried them to new shores. Light filtered through water, painting them in hues of silver and green. Some grew like fans, some like pillars swaying softly. They had no eyes, yet they knew the sun. No minds, yet they understood change. If one could see the world then, it would seem like a dream beneath the waves, a slow, serene ballet of life discovering itself. But time always moves. Some grew faster, some learned to move. Traces were left upon the sand, the first marks of motion in the history of the earth. From those tiny steps, the world began to change. Competition arose, not from hatred, but survival. The oceans grew busier. Yet beauty remained, the dance of current and light, the pulse of creation itself. At night, the sea glowed with living stars. Bioluminescent creatures floated like galaxies in water. No eyes witnessed them, but beauty does not need to be seen to exist. From these colonies came everything that would ever live. Every creature since carries a memory of that first ocean, a memory of harmony, of breath, of the stillness before fear. Slowly, life began to let go of its anchor. From colonies bound to stone came creatures that dared to drift. They were small, fragile, nearly invisible, yet each motion marked the beginning of a story that would never end. There was no intent to explore, only a soft pull, toward warmth, light, or sustenance. Some survived, others vanished. There was no tragedy in it, only the patient rhythm of nature learning what works. The sea filled with motion. Ribbon-like beings glided through the water, spirals shimmered, translucent spheres pulsed gently. The ocean had become a living sky, alive with slow constellations of movement. And then the first hunger was born. One being consumed another. No malice, no cruelty, only necessity. It was a quiet act, but it changed everything. Life began to feed upon life. Movement became swifter. Muscles formed, fins appeared, senses awoke. Creatures learned to feel vibrations, to sense the flow of light. The sea had become aware of itself. Balance shifted. The calm ocean turned dynamic, full of pursuit and escape, of hiding and seeking. The first strategies of survival took shape. Night in the ocean was no longer just dark. It was alive with purpose. Bioluminescence became language, deception, warning, and art. The sea glowed with life learning to express itself, yet harmony was not lost. Among the coral, some still shared quietly, exchanging nourishment, coexisting without struggle. Life was not cruel, it was simply awake. If anyone could see that ancient sea, they would not hear chaos. They would hear the world breathing faster, a heartbeat of evolution echoing through time. The earth had learned to move, and with that movement came everything that would ever live. Time passed so long that even the oceans began to change. From there, once dark surfaces came reflections of a soft blue sky. The air grew lighter, and the barren land at the edges began to shimmer with green, not grass, not trees, but the thin film of the first moss. In the cracks of stone, water trickled, carrying salt and minerals from the receding seas. Tiny beings followed it, adjusting their fragile bodies to the strange pull of gravity. For the first time, life breathed air. It was not breath as we know it, but the earth's own sigh moving through living forms. The sky remained veiled with thin volcanic haze, yet sunlight reached the surface, warm and slow. Where water met stone, colonies spread like whispers. The change was invisible day by day, but in millennia, the coast transformed into a soft border between two worlds. Creatures that once swam began clinging to wet rocks, learning to resist dryness. Some grew thin membranes for protection. Others secreted mucus to survive the heat. Each adaptation was an experiment, an expression of nature's patience. The land was still silent. No voices, no rustle of leaves. Only the crack of stone, the hiss of drying mud, and the faint tremor of something new. Some tiny forms crawled upward, unaware they were creating history. Their translucent limbs left the first marks on the land. They did not seek to conquer it. They simply existed, and existence was enough. The land tested them with heat and light, with the cruelty of the sun and the emptiness of air. But death only fed the soil, and from the soil, new life came forth. Thousands of years passed like a slow exhale. The earth turned green at its edges, and the dream of life beyond the sea began to take shape. Then one day, from the shallows, a creature lifted itself onto stone. Its fins had become limbs, its breath shallow but real. It rested and it lived. The world changed. Under the pale moon, the first shadow of life on land moved, not with purpose, but with the quiet inevitability of nature. Its trace vanished with the tide, yet the meaning endured. It was the first step toward everything that would ever walk the earth. After that first step, the earth was never the same. Time moved on, unhurried but unstoppable, like a single breath that never ended. From the damp edges of the sea, life slowly spread across the widening land. There was no noise, no explosion of change, only the gentle persistence of water dripping on stone for thousands of years. From the wet soil came new forms, some with tails turning into legs, some with hardened skin to endure the sun. Each was nature's experiment, some failing, some surviving, all leaving traces for the next to follow. The sky was clearer now, its blue deeper. The air carried more oxygen, enough to sustain larger life. But amid this invisible change, something began to grow inside those small bodies. Not just the urge to survive, but the faintest awareness of existence. A small creature paused between two stones, feeling the warmth of the sun on its back. It didn't know what the sun was, but it felt the comfort of heat, and in that pause, it became something new. The earth had begun to sense itself, not in thought, but in the silent language of feeling. Beneath the ground, roots spread, blind yet purposeful. Above, soft stems rose toward the sky, trembling in wind and light. They were the first to stand against gravity, the first to reach upward without knowing why. With their growth, the earth began to green, not as beauty, but as proof that life could exist amid uncertainty. Rain fell, carrying the scent of new soil, a mixture of mineral, decay, and untouched air. There was no one to smell it, but the earth breathed it through every pore. Rivers formed, feeding moss, carrying seeds, carving valleys that would one day hold life in abundance. In the clear waters of those rivers, larvae hatched bridges between sea and land. On the banks, tiny insects shimmered in sunlight, trembling but determined. They lived and died without reason, yet every movement shaped the story of survival. There was peace in all this. No purpose, no fear of the future. Each living thing simply existed, and existence was enough. A small creature walked across damp soil, unaware it was continuing a story millions of years in the making. It turned its head, not from fear, but from curiosity, the first spark of wonder on land. The earth watched in silence. Mountains slept, oceans whispered, and the sky held everything in a soft embrace. If the earth could dream, this was its dream, life unfolding, slow and pure. The world did not yet think, but it had begun to feel. And then came a pulse. Not a sound, but a rhythm that moved through leaves and water. A vibration that connected all things. It was not God, not spirit, not mind, but the first whisper of collective awareness, the earth breathing through its living skin, learning for the first time what it meant to be alive. The night in the ancient world was a symphony of deep silence. There were no cities, no lights, no sound of engines, only the whisper of wind passing across long plains and the soft murmur of oceans brushing against stone shores. Beneath a sky filled with countless unnamed stars, life rested in perfect rhythm. Great beasts that roamed proudly in daylight now lay upon the plains, while smaller creatures sought warmth beneath stones. In the distance, the sound of rivers echoed like the long breath of the earth, flowing slowly, carrying time along with it. In the darkness lit only by the silver moonlight, the shadows of trees moved like ancient spirits dancing in silence. Perhaps in those times, the night was not merely for sleep, but a moment when the earth spoke in a language no longer understood by modern man. Every sound, every motion, every breath of wind held meaning understood only by those who lived beneath the first sky. This world was so quiet, yet within that stillness life pulsed softly, as if the earth itself were dreaming of a future yet to come. As dawn slowly emerged beyond the ancient horizon, a thin mist began to rise from the valleys and marshes, covering the world like a soft silk veil. The first light touched the old stones, making them gleam like sacred metal freshly forged. Large birds took flight from their nests, flapping wings still damp with dew. While in the distance, herds of ancient herbivores moved slowly through the tall grass. The world then was still pure, untouched by ambition or war, filled only with the instinct to survive and a profound stillness. There were no words, no prayers, no history, only breath and movement repeating in nature's rhythm. The earth in that era was not merely a dwelling place, but a living being that breathed alongside its inhabitants. Every mountain seemed to possess a soul. Every river carried a story, and every stone stood as a witness to time unmeasured. The morning light shone upon it all without preference, illuminating a life so simple yet so meaningful, as if greeting a world just awakening from a slumber beyond measure. Amid the vast expanse of that young world, an early human walked slowly along the edge of a wide river. His body was wrapped in drying animal skin, and his eyes gazed at the shimmering water that mirrored the soft sky. He did not know the meaning of time, nor what the future was. He only knew that the sun would return tomorrow, and the river would continue to flow like an unending breath. In the distance, his kin moved silently, carrying the remains of last night's hunt. They walked with cautious steps along the soft earth, leaving traces soon to be covered by the morning dew. There were no homes, no names, only places that constantly changed, following the rhythm of the seasons and the movement of stars. At night, they slept beneath a sky filled with light, listening to the sounds of insects, the wind, and sometimes the roar of hidden beasts in the trees. Yet there was no deep fear, for the world then was not an enemy, but a mother, harsh, yet just. They lived under the embrace of nature that knew neither mercy nor hatred. And each morning they opened their eyes with simple calmness, accepting life as the river flows without question. Without expectation, only the gentle continuity that echoed the song of the earth itself. On a night colder than usual, the sky turned into a dark sea without stars. The wind blew from the north, carrying a strange scent they had never smelled before. A small fire burned dimly in the circle of stones, its light flickering gently across still faces and weary eyes. An old woman sat near the flame, her hair gray, her gaze fixed on the embers as if trying to read secrets within the red glow. Before her, children lay exhausted, their bodies wrapped in warm animal hides. The men stood guard at the edge of the circle, gripping sharp stones and spears of hard wood. They knew something was changing in the outer world. Perhaps herds of great beasts were moving through the valley, or perhaps the seasons had turned too quickly. Amid the howling wind came the sound of a tree breaking in the distance, and all eyes turned toward the silent darkness. But no one moved. They simply listened, their heartbeats slow but strong, waiting to see whether the world would come to them as danger or as wonder. That night was long, as if time itself held its breath. There were no words, only the awareness that life was fragile, and every burning ember was an extension of their hope that the world might remain warm for just one more night. When morning came, thick fog covered the valley, hanging between rocks and wild grass like the heavy breath of the earth. The cold air bit into their skin, yet there was a stillness that could not be explained, as if the world had just been born again after a long night of vigilance. The oldest man of the group walked slowly toward the east, where a faint light began to pierce the clouds. In his hand, he carried a piece of wood with a charred tip, the remains of last night's fire. He planted it into the wet ground, gazing at the sun as it rose behind the ridge. His face showed no awe, only calm acceptance, the understanding that each day is a repetition of the same thing. Yet it always feels new. Round him, women began to spread animal hides to dry. Children gathered small stones, and the men inspected tracks on the ground, searching for signs that great herds had passed through the valley. There was no sound except the whisper of wind and the quiet rhythm of footsteps. They lived without the concept of future or past, only an awareness of today, and that the world around them was still alive, still giving, still turning in silence. Meanwhile, great birds flew low over the fog, their calls echoing softly, as if reminding them that time never truly stops. It only shifts from hand to hand, from light to shadow. And when night returned for the last time in this story, that ancient world sank into the soft glow, fading at the horizon. A small fire burned in the center of a circle of stones, flickering gently like the heartbeat of a tired earth. The first humans sat around it in silence, as if they knew that quietness was holier than prayer. In the sky, stars appeared one by one, marking directions that would one day guide sailors and priests, wanderers and kings. Those born long after this world had turned into history. The night wind drifted softly across their hair and skin, carrying the scent of wet soil, smoke, and new life. In the distance, a great animal walked slowly toward the river, its shadow dissolving into the dark. Everything felt eternal, though time quietly continued to move, carrying them toward a future none could imagine. Perhaps among them was one who gazed at the sky a little longer, sensing something that had no name yet, something that would one day be called memory. He closed his eyes and fell asleep beneath the cold starlight, unaware that thousands of years later, others would speak of them. Trying to understand the meaning of this silence, searching for traces of a world that once lived without words, without borders, without history. Such was the world before everything began, when the earth was still young, and humankind did not yet know that they were creating time.